live. I just press live. Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live chat on Supervision. Okay. Maybe let's wait a bit more
For
for
more
people
than
to
one
come in.
person to come on.
That's right. Yeah. In the meantime, it's nice to see all of you. Janice Koh and Umi joining us from Singapore, and Patrick Teoh joining us from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia.
No.
Yeah.
Hi.
I like, Patrick, that you've got Patrick Teoh live as your name. No need to change. It's okay. It's okay. It's nice. Nice to be reassured that you're not recording.
I did a broadcast on StreamYard last night, so I titled that Patrick Teoh Live.
Yeah.
It's better than test broadcast.
That's right. Yeah. So Patrick Teoh, only Patrick Teoh is live, by the way. The rest of us
Pre-recorded.
pre-recorded before this session. Yeah. Okay. So let's see more people coming in a bit, and we'll start very soon.
How do you know how many people have come in?
I can see a little counter at the top with an eye,
the host,
and then it tells me how many are there. Okay, I think we can pretty much start. Thank you so much for joining us, actors of Supervision. I'm going to start by asking all of you to do a personal introduction of who you are. Okay, so maybe we can start with Janice.
Oh, really? I thought we were going to go with Dad. Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Janice Koh, and I play Jenny, the bad guy in Supervision.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Janice, for that bad guy introduction. Next, we will go with Patrick. Just a few words for introduction, Patrick.
Hello, everybody. I'm Patrick Teoh, and I play Tech, who is Jenny's father. And she's not a bad guy. I mean, she is actually quite a good girl that Tech loves very much. But yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Dad, just for you, you get Taco Bell.
Jumping in to defend your daughter, yeah. And lastly, of course, we will have Umi.
Hi everyone, I'm Umi. I play Yanti, the domestic helper that Jenny just hired.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so there goes our round of introductions for the actors. Okay, and then I think to get things going today, I'm going to start with a very brief presentation. I think the play Supervision touches on a lot of themes, but one of the things that I'm quite interested in is this idea of the representation of the foreign domestic worker in Singapore theatre. Yeah, so I would like to say, like, before Yanti, she's had all these other sisters who were her predecessors, and I would like to trace that kind of history all the way back to the 80s. Okay, so let's bring up the slide. We have a little short presentation. Okay, there we go. All the cameras there. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about foreign domestic workers in Singapore. The foreign maid scheme was introduced in the year 1978. Right, 1978. And that year, we had around 5,000 foreign domestic workers from countries such as the Philippines, Indonesia, etc., working in Singapore. And what happened was that they were able to relieve a lot of career women who then were able to enter the workforce. Yeah. So in many ways, foreign domestic workers have contributed very tangibly to our economic growth. Okay. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at, in the year 1986, the theatre company, The Third Stage, put up this play which is called Esperanza. And Esperanza is the name of a foreign domestic worker who happened to unluckily be working for quite abusive employers. Okay, so as you can see there, Wong Soo-yi plays Esperanza, a domestic worker with an abusive employer. In that scene, in that picture there, you can see the employer spraying insecticide on her hair, and the employer was basically accusing her of having dandruff, of having lice, and this is one of the things that the employer did to her. Yeah. Okay. Next slide. So the play Esperanza was based on this book, which is called the Maid Tangle. So 8 years after the foreign maid scheme was introduced in Singapore, people were already starting to get concerned about their situation in these various homes. So this book was produced based on 500 interviews with domestic workers, and a lot of them actually gave accounts of quite unreasonable employers, and basically a culture shock, right? Because you're dealing with people of a different nationality who sometimes speak different languages, etc. Okay, next slide. So this play Esperanza was first previewed in the newspapers. And what's interesting was that for this particular preview, they invited a lot of foreign domestic workers, at least 30 or 40, to come and watch. And they also invited the press. So journalists would write about this play in the papers as a preview. And then they got these particular responses in the forum pages. Okay, let's look at those headlines. The first one says, "Too much has been said on abuse of maids." Okay. Second one says, "Most of them enjoy their stay here and are well treated." And the third one says, "Singaporeans cannot have changed that much." Yeah. So that third one, to put it in context, this is a person who said previously there would be Malay and Chinese servants who would work for families, and they would have quite good relationships with those families. Yeah. So you can see just a cross section of Singaporeans who had not watched the play, but were nevertheless quite triggered, quite defensive, but what they felt was an unfair portrayal of some abusive employers. Okay, next slide. Okay, eventually the play premiered and people actually went to watch it. And incidentally, the newspaper asked 2 reviewers to review the play. And what's really interesting about this is that on the left side, they asked a foreign domestic worker to review it. And you can see at the top, it says, "What a maid says." Obviously, the term maid is very problematic, but you must remember this was back in the 80s, yeah? So what a maid says, "Play may help bridge a yawning chasm." Okay? And on the right side, what an employer says, "Clash with maid for good drama." Okay, so as you can see, the reviews were actually quite positive. So the responses to the previews were quite negative, but when people came to watch the play, they felt, oh, this is so important to give the public the perspective, the point of view of foreign domestic workers. Yeah. Okay. Next slide. I must say though that, okay, after that year, 1986, in the year 1987, what happened was that 5 members of the third stage were actually arrested, and they were accused of being part of this Marxist network. Yeah. Along with like lawyers as well as social workers, etc. Okay. So
What were they accused of again, Alfian? Sorry.
yeah, they were accused of being part of a Marxist conspiracy. There were 22 people of them. Yeah, and this was the same year, Patrick, as Operation Lalang in Malaysia, by the way.
Oh, okay.
So there was a security sweep of activists, etc. And what happened was that it was basically a warning that was sent out to people working with civil society. You can do law, just don't do activist law. You can do theatre, just don't do activist theatre as well.
Right.
Yeah, don't try to speak up for the oppressed or the marginalized and to sort of like mobilize and get them organized. Okay, so for a long time there was this silence regarding domestic workers on the Singapore stage until we got to the 90s. Yeah, and I found this play, Mail Order Brides, in the year 1998 by Action Theatre. And you have Nolina Muhammad, who plays Letitia, a domestic worker who wishes to marry a US soldier. So all these characters happen to be like mail order brides, Asian brides who were going to marry someone overseas as a ticket to a better life, etc. It was a little bit Orientalist, and the depiction of the women were mostly as victims. Yeah. Okay, next slide. And then we move on. In the same year, we have this play called Haunted the Musical. It was done by Theatre Works, and you have the lovely Pam Wee there, master of accents, who plays a domestic worker in a haunted house. Yeah. So in this play, the character she was playing, it was not a central character, it was a side character, but nevertheless, she had a really great song, a love duet, and she also had a love interest. Yeah. But she wasn't the central character. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, we move on to this play in the year 2001. This is Blithe Spirit by Wal Rice. And you see Pam Wee there as well, again, and she's in the right hand side. She's holding a broom. She plays Edith, who's a psychic housekeeper in this play. Yeah.
Wow.
Uh,
Okay.
next slide. Yeah, she's got talent. Okay, next slide, we see this play called Boing Boing by Wal Rice as well. And we have the actress Siti Khalijah Zainal, who plays Rosa, an Indonesian and exasperated housekeeper. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about these plays. Next slide, please. Both these plays happen to be adaptations of foreign plays. So the first one, as you can see on the left side, you have the character Edith in Blithe Spirit. This is a play by Noel Coward that was premiered in 1941. Okay, on the right side, you have Bertha in the play Boing Boing by Mark Camoletti, also a housekeeper, and this premiered in the year 1960. Yes, so as you can see, they were mostly comic roles, and they were also secondary roles. And as we tried to adapt it within a Singapore context, the housekeepers became domestic workers. Yeah? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then I want to move a little bit away from theater to look at TV. This is an interesting and quite controversial portrayal. This is from The Noose, which, as you would know, is a spoof show on television that kind of spoofs the news. This is a character called Letitia Bonino, played by Michelle Chong, and she's a domestic worker with a Bangladeshi boyfriend. And it ran for like around 7 seasons, The Noose, and this has been quite a controversial character because some domestic workers feel that it's mocking of Filipino domestic workers in Singapore, that there's an exaggerated accent, etc. Yeah, but at the same time, I think let's be careful to see that this character is scripted by someone. It's not just Michelle Chong herself who came out with this character, right? As an actor, she's under contractual obligation to act. But at the same time, I think we should also critically look at the kind of social environment that permitted this kind of portrayal. Why was there not pushback from the public? Why wasn't there kind of outrage? Did people find this funny? Did people find this amusing? Did people find this okay? Yeah? Next slide, please. Okay. Now, in the year 2010, The Necessary Stage produced this play called Model Citizens. And the character Siti Khalijah Zainal, you know her because previously she was in Boing Boing. Now she also plays an Indonesian domestic worker called Melly. And she's a worker who wishes to marry her Singaporean boyfriend. Okay? And what's interesting about this play is that, okay, for one, she's no longer playing a comic character. Yeah? She's playing actually a very fully fleshed, three-dimensional, flawed, nuanced character who's not exactly very sympathetic. And I think this is interesting because you can see that Haresh Sharma, the playwright, is writing this character who's an individual, not just a representation, but an individual. Yeah. And by the way, Siti Khalijah, she won Best Actress Award for this particular depiction. Okay, next slide, please. And of course, in talking about domestic workers, we can't run away from talking about this wonderful film by the filmmaker Anthony Chen called Ilo Ilo, which won the what is the award? It's not the Palme d'Or. It's it's another award at the Cannes Film Festival, right? Do you know, Janice? Okay, never mind. But it won.
It was like a special award at the Cannes, but he
Yeah.
also won Golden Horse, right?
Golden Horse Awards, that's right.
Yeah.
Like a whole clutch of Golden Horse Awards. And I was very proud of this film that even though it's a Singapore film, it put a foreign domestic worker who was played by Anjali Bayani, plays a character called Teresa, as a central character in this film. Yeah, so she's a domestic worker who takes care of a troubled boy and somehow becomes a kind of a substitute mother for him. I have a comment from a audience member who says it's the camera door at the Cannes Film Festival. Thank you. I love the wisdom of the crowds.
That came from
Thank you. Yes, the camera door. Okay, so this is Ilo Ilo, and you've not finally, but one of the instances when you see a domestic worker in a central role. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. And now we are here with Supervision, a play that was done 2 years ago by Wild Rice. And in this particular play, we have the actress Umi Kalthum Ismail, who plays Yanti, a domestic worker who is a caregiver to an elderly invalid. Yeah, so I'm sure some of you, we've put this online for the past week. And I'm sure some of our commentators and viewers have watched it and would have questions for. Yes, Anthony got camera door. That's one of the comments that came in. We had questions for the cast. Okay, so in looking at how domestic workers are represented, I think there are questions of like who can represent them, who should be able to write about them, what's the kind of research that you need to do, who are the actors who should be able to act them. Yeah. So I think in addition to trying to give visibility to domestic workers on the Singapore stage, in Singapore theatre, I think self representation is also very, very important. So let's look at our last slide. And here we see a little skit, a sketch called Big Dream that was performed in the year 2019 at the Migrant Worker Poetry Competition in Singapore in December last year. It was written, directed, and performed by the Birds Migrant Theatre. So this is actually a theatre group that's formed entirely of migrant workers. So you have foreign domestic workers, you have people who work in construction, shipyard, etc. So they are a group composed entirely of migrant workers. And I think what's interesting is that they've been receiving support from the necessary stage for their training and rehearsals. And they've been able to perform in venues like, for example, if you recognize that space, there's the Wild Rice Theatre. Yeah. And in the year 2018, also as part of the Singapore Theatre Festival, we hosted a reading by them where they read a script that's written by one of their members. And hopefully, I think this we see this as a very promising trend, and hopefully we see more migrant workers getting involved in things like theatre with all the support that we can give them. Okay, all right. Thank you so much. That's the end of my short presentation, tracing the history of how domestic workers have appeared on stage. Okay, so I'm just going to throw this question out to all of you. Any thoughts based on that little series of slides? Janice?
Yeah, I was just going to say there was a particular slide in your presentation, Alfian,
Yes.
Where you showed press reaction and audience reaction during the
Yes.
1980s. And
Yeah.
I was thinking, how much it has changed. Because when we staged Supervision,
Mm,
a lot of the audience members were very positive about the
right.
message we were trying to impart, and they said stories like that should be told, must be told, as
Right.
compared to what you said in the 80s. People were said, "Hey, what's wrong with us? Nothing wrong, what?" You know?
Mm, 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 mm.
Yeah. But
Right.
I mean, it's taken quite a few years, but it has definitely
Mm,
changed quite drastically. Yeah.
right.
Mm.
Yeah, I do see that as a positive development. Yeah.
Mm.
And I'm sure both Janice and Umi as well. Have you heard anything interesting from audience members?
I remember in one of our talkback sessions that was on stage
Yep.
uh, during the run last year,
Mm-hmm.
the feedback from a number of the domestic workers who had come to watch the show
Mm.
Right.
was that the question was, how come the it was always kind of like painted in a rather negative light, in the
Mm,
sense that their plight or
mm-hmm.
their existence as human beings was always vis-a-vis the rather always in a disempowered position,
Right. Right.
right?
Mm,
In a way, more pessimistic, more negative. And I think that trend does happen in a place like Singapore because it is
mm.
coming out of their relationship to the country in which they're living in.
Right. 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 Mm,
And they were asking, why can't we see more plays where it's a lot more positive representation?
mm.
And my gut response to that was that
Yeah.
it does have to come from the very people
Mm,
who are writing from their experience. As in, like,
right.
if we are not from this group,
Yep.
which I consider marginalized,
Yep.
it would be almost patronizing for me to think
Mm,
how to positively,
right, right, right,
represent them in a play that I have written, because I don't understand. I may not fully understand
right.
where they are coming from, and actually, it's much more powerful if it comes out of the mouths of the people who
Yeah.
are going through this. And of course, if you go back to all the home countries where all the migrant labor is from, there is
Yeah.
no way that might. There's very unlikely that the work that's coming out there have anything to do with this experience.
Right.
So in a
Yeah.
way, the disempowered positioning that's coming out of the work here is because that's what we
That is
know.
that situation here. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Okay, so actually, we've got quite a few interesting questions coming in. Yeah, so I think maybe I'll just jump into some of them. I'm gonna pull one out right now, which is by Ron Tan. Okay, so this is to each of you. What did you do to prepare for your role? Maybe we'll start with Umi. Yes, because I think as a Malay person in Singapore, to portray this Indonesian domestic worker, right? Yeah. So could you sort of like share with us that process? Sorry, Umi, you're on mute, nah? Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yes.
There were two major parts
Mm-hmm.
that I had to work on. The first was, of course, the accent.
Yeah.
And so Alcian connected me to Wiwi, who is a helper, and she's also part of the Birds Migrant Theatre.
Yeah.
So she, it was very funny because she needed to help me speak in a more Indonesian accent. Where for her, when she goes for her Birds Migrant Theatre group, she
Yeah.
has to work on her English. So it was her
Okay.
trying to teach me the opposite. So, but she was really helpful, and she really knew, like, because she's also a writer, so she knew, like, oh, okay, but this is what the writer probably intends, so maybe we should change the way you say this and you say that.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so we got close. We're the same age.
Yeah.
She's been here for 10 years. So met her for a
Wow.
couple of sessions. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um,
sorry, yeah. So that means she also helped with translation, right, of the text from English to a
yes. So
colloquial
from
Indonesian. Yeah.
yes to some Javanese, some
Mm.
words,
Some
some of
words
the
in
words.
Javanese.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Yeah. So
yes.
you practically got a kind of coach in the form of a real life domestic worker.
Yes.
Yeah. Coach with the
Yeah.
dialogue and okay.
Yeah. I learned a lot from her. Yeah.
Right.
Also about like how she is. How she's at home with her employer. Her employer is really nice. Encourages her to go for her theatre classes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. How about Patrick?
Well,
What
okay.
preparation for this role?
The
Yeah.
question was what did you do to prepare
To
for your
prepare for
role?
your role.
I
Yeah.
suppose compared to Janice and Umi, I have a much easier job trying to get into the role of tech because I'm the same age as the character.
Right.
I also have a physical disability,
Right.
and yeah, so I can sympathize with tech's predicament. So how I prepared for the role was that I read the script many, 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 many times because at my age, one of the biggest worries about being in a play is that I can't remember my lines.
Yep.
But of course, as I read the script over and over again, I began to see what made Tech tick, if you like, and what's the relationship between him and Jenny.
Yeah.
What makes them fight like the way they do when they actually love both. They love each other very, very much, but it's just that they show it in rather strange ways.
Oh yes.
And the reason why that is so, was one of the things that I was trying to discover as I kept reading the script over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. So it's so interesting, Patrick, that you talk about disability. Because I think that's also something that the play explores, and someone has said that the world is not divided into the able-bodied and the disabled, but between the disabled and the temporarily abled. You know,
Okay.
that all of us at one point of time are going to be disabled. As we grow older, etc., we are going to need some kind of assistance in some form or the other. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
I thought that that was really something. And I suppose in the play, it is a glimpse of a future where a lot of us are going to live longer and also going to be in stages of disability and going to be depending on all these caregivers, whether they are from family or whether, you know, the caregiving is outsourced to people from other countries. Yeah. For Janice, how did you prepare for this role?
I think for me, one of the important questions to address was the degree to which we like or not like, or agree or not agree with Jenny's positioning
Mm, mm,
in the
mm,
show.
mm,
And for me, it's like, I feel it was very, it's almost as if I want to set the audience up for a challenge, which is
right.
I'm not going to be right off the bat the moderate,
Mm,
average,
mm,
friendly employer, which I think most people are very caring. I
right.
would say the majority of people are understanding, and it's not that Jenny isn't. I'm just gonna pitch her, position her at the
Yeah.
most stressful point of her life. That's all.
Right. 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 Okay.
Because
Mm,
um,
mm,
I think it's important that we judge her
mm,
and
mm,
then
mm,
realize that we
mm,
all have a bit of
mm.
her somewhere in us. I think that actually, for me, that is the more important turning point in the show,
Right.
to judge her first and then judge yourself
Okay.
or judge your own response to her. I don't know. Because
Yeah.
I feel like it's very easy to be the moderate.
Mm,
But
mm-hmm.
what does that do
Yeah.
for the way we think about the show and the play? Because I
Right.
think
Right.
that for me that's one of the questions that was running through my head.
No, absolutely. I think if she was a much more chill kind of character, we wouldn't have those high stakes and we wouldn't have the kind of drama that we witness inside the play itself. Yeah. And Janice, what you said is important because I got this other question, which is a nice segue from what you said, which is how do you guys choose or negotiate what to represent in a character? For example, in this case, the domestic worker or the evil man, such that controversial or such as controversial or stereotypical traits without it being offensive.
I
Yeah.
mean, just to answer that question, I
Mm,
never felt that I needed to stereotype Jenny as a character.
right.
I
Right.
don't think we need to play. I mean, I was joking when I say I'm the bad guy. I don't need to play the bad guy. I just need to play
Yeah.
someone who is juggling so many things, caring for an elderly parent while taking care of young children, while being economically active,
Mm,
all at the same
mm,
time.
mm,
Um, and that is like a large number of people in this kind of sandwich
right. Yeah.
who are sandwiched between two generations and expected to be the career woman at work at the same time, and in living in a very patriarchal Asian society that
Mm,
has
mm, 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 mm.
expectations of what a woman is supposed to do. uh,
Right.
all that is unsaid, but that's where
Mm,
she is, where the trap is. And
right.
what does that turn you into, and what does that make you become when you interact with someone who is then no longer your helper, but
Mm,
literally almost like a robot or a machine to help you
mm,
do your work better? Do you know what I mean? It
right.
almost becomes
Yeah.
transactional. So that was my entry point, as opposed to I'm going to play this kind of person,
A type or
the
yeah.
type. Yeah,
Right.
because if
Right.
you
Right.
just come from the pressures of life in general, I
Mm,
think most people can identify with that better than just a stereotype of a typical employer who is abusing their maid.
right. 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 Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that you have this interesting speech. I think which I think for many audience members, you know, they have a 180-degree turn when they're like, it's so easy to hate on Jenny, yeah, but then she's got this speech where all her frustration comes out in this whole torrent, and you realize that her brother's not there, that caregiving is such gendered work, whether it's her or the domestic worker, right? And so where are the men in the picture?
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of like, yeah, let's just see her in a different light.
Yeah,
Okay.
there was a question from
Mhm.
somebody who said, like, if you could
Yeah.
add one more character to the play, who would it be? And I'm like, bring back the brother. Where is the brother?
Right.
I want to
Yeah, that
have
was
this phone call with the brother.
should have that huge confrontation, right? Yeah, where were you? Do you know what you made me do? I became a camera freak. Um, yeah. Do you
But
know how much time
somebody,
I spent at Funan buying
somebody,
cameras? Yeah.
somebody in Malaysia also commented
Yep.
after watching the play. They said that the Jenny character, and in fact the story of the play,
Yeah.
makes it feel as though taking care of one's parents
Mm,
is a chore that must
mm,
be performed.
mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
they said that in Asian culture, taking
mm.
care of your parents is something you do,
Right.
not something that you think you have to do uh,
Mm,
because you don't want to. It
mm,
just is just in our culture that taking care of parents is something that you do, whether you do it alone if you're unlucky, or even you have help from other siblings. That's
yeah.
completely your luck,
Right. Right. Right.
But people don't complain about
Mm,
looking after their parents, which is an
mm.
idealistic sort of view. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I think it depends on the relationships that you have with your parents.
Mm, mm,
Also, right? Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna look at some of these questions. One of them is it's quite interesting. Okay. So this is from Leo Cavalis, and he's asking, has this production changed or reinforced your view on technology? Umi, any thoughts on that?
On technology or like on
Yeah.
about CCTV and like
Yeah, I
I
suppose
think yeah.
CCTV and also maybe like
Mm,
smartphones as well.
I heard a story from my friend after he watched the show.
Mm,
So his sister just gave birth to twins. She's a full-time nurse. So
yeah,
they needed to get a helper. So,
yeah.
and they installed CCTV in the house. And when they reviewed what happened during the day, they saw that the helper had pinched both of the twins quite badly till the twins were like crying.
Oh
And
dear. Okay.
if they hadn't seen that, then they wouldn't know, and they would continue with having the helper around. So I understand, like that it was important for them to
Yeah,
put the cameras there. So,
yeah.
well, it doesn't change my view. I still think that it's important
Mm-hmm.
for people to have CCTVs at home. If I'm answering the question correctly.
Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you do see the benefits of actually being
I
able to
do, but it's like pros and
monitor.
cons, right? I don't want to be watched. I mean, I don't
Right.
want to be watched, but like,
But you want to watch others. That's always a problem, right? We always want to be on one
yeah,
side of the camera. We don't
yeah,
want to be on the other side.
yeah.
Yeah.
I guess,
Okay.
yeah.
So I'm gonna actually invite Thomas and one of our caseworkers, yeah, Jaya, on board. But I just want to tell our viewers and listeners right now that the actors are still gonna be around. If you got specific questions for them, I will bring them on. I'm gonna bring them backstage at the moment. There's this interesting thing called backstage. So bye Umi, bye Janice. This is not a final goodbye. You're still around, and we're gonna say hi to Thomas.
Hello.
Yeah, and bye bye Patrick and Jaya. Okay, so I'm just gonna pull you out individually, and you do a short introduction of yourselves. Yeah. Okay, we'll start with Thomas.
Hi, my name
Hi.
is Thomas, and
Yep.
I'm the playwright.
Okay. Thank you for that very yeah, sharp introduction. Short and sweet introduction, Thomas. And here we have Jaya from home.
Hi, I'm Jaya. I'm from home. I'm a case manager there and I work with domestic workers.
Okay, Jaya, could you explain to us what home is?
Home is an NGO. We work with migrant workers. We offer them legal advice. We offer help to those who are in crisis. We give them financial assistance. We
Right.
help them with their well-being issues. And particularly for domestic workers, we have a
Yeah.
shelter.
Okay.
For those who have left their employers and they need a place to stay, they come to us and we help them with their cases where we give them, we inform them how they can move forward with their particular situations, whatever their problems might be. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much, Jaya. Okay. To get a little ball rolling, I just want to ask you, Jaya, after watching the play, what was some of your initial thoughts?
Mm.
Yeah.
I was really well, I was really quite amazed at how the play actually depicted a lot of the issues that domestic workers who seek assistance at home
Right.
tell us.
Mm,
The when the employer Jenny said, "Oh, didn't you know like passports employers keep one?" All that kind
mm,
of thing is very real for a lot of domestic workers here in Singapore.
right.
And I think the common thread that ran throughout the play and is also very pertinent for a domestic worker
Yeah.
is the sort of power imbalance that exists between an employer and a domestic worker.
Right.
Because that is something that I guess a lot of people when they talk about the treatment of domestic workers.
Yeah.
Like for example, I think at one point Jenny says in the play, I treat her very good already. Uh,
Mm,
and
mm,
but
mm,
that's sort of and sometimes the argument in that sense is, oh, there's no abuse. I give her food. I give her 3 meals a day. I'm not
right.
overly verbally abusive, or she doesn't have
Mm,
that work. But that
mm,
sort of
mm,
ignores a lot of these other little things, because there was a few times in the play where Jenny was able to threaten Yanti with her employment.
right.
When she gave the father certain kinds of food, when she moved the cameras, it was very easy for her to say, "I'm going to send you back."
Right.
And
Right. Right. Yeah.
you could, yeah, you could see how Yanti reacted. Also, she reacted, really,
Mm,
really. She was almost begging for her job because she needed to just support her kids back home.
right.
So that was really one of my biggest takeaways from the play, because I think it really depicted that really, really well. Yeah.
Right. And you're not just saying this because Thomas is in the room, right?
Oh no, no, no!
Because I can put him backstage and I can. No, no, but I think this is very nice to hear. Not that I think Thomas needs validation or anything, but I'm sure he did a lot of work for
Yeah.
this play. And Thomas, you want to tell us a little bit about some of the research that you did for this play?
Yeah, so I mean, this whole thing kind of started just watching my aunt put up
Yep.
cameras in my grandparents' place.
Right.
So it kind of sparked off from there. And then I just wanted to see, what would happen if I put people in, 3 people in the same house and push it
Yep.
to the limits of it.
Yep.
And along the way, of course, I mean, Jenny and Tick's characters, these are characters I'm very familiar with.
Yeah.
Because these are characters based on, I mean, my own experiences, looking at my grandparents, looking at
Mm,
their children, taking care of them.
right.
For the character of Yanti, I had to do a lot more research because
Mm-hmm.
and in the course of that, I found out a lot about that whole process of the power imbalance that Jaya was just talking about.
Right.
Is a big part of it is to do with the fact that they have to borrow money to get here in the first place. So
Right.
that the threat of, I'm going to send you back, I'm going to terminate you right now, is
Yeah.
like, it's really very painful. It's real, and if they are going to get
Mm-hmm.
sent back within the first couple of months, that's just
Mm,
that. And also, of
mm,
course, Alvin, you
mm.
and I, we went down to Paya Lebar one Sunday afternoon.
Yes.
Too creepy, man. Just holding a couple of drinks, and we asked if they would talk to us a little bit about how their lives were here,
Right.
and they very kindly shared their mats and
Mm.
food with us as well.
Yeah, yeah. So I thought there was an interesting experiment I think that we did, in a sense that I think sometimes like some writers are like, oh, I can't write about migrant workers because I don't know any, for example, right? And I think for me also, I don't know many, and maybe for you yourself, so you weren't quite sure about like Indonesian domestic workers at that
Yeah.
point in time. Yeah. So we just went down. So guys, this is what you can do. Go down to Paya Lebar on a Sunday and pluck up some courage to just randomly strike conversations with people. Then and we realized they were really friendly, right, Thomas?
Yeah.
They were so yeah. So I did the translation. I spoke in Bahasa Indonesia, and they were so willing to share about their lives. And that really caught me by surprise because they weren't guarded. They weren't like really asking us too many questions about where we were from, what this was for, you know.
Mm.
So I thought that was so helpful, and I think we owe them so much in the construction of this play. Yeah,
And all also in the backdrop of Under the Tracks, there were security officers hanging all around,
that's right.
just making sure nothing happens there.
Right. Okay, I have this interesting question, about Thomas. For Thomas, let me pull this out. Okay, so Thomas, would you consider a sequel or another play about other migrant workers given the recent spotlight on them?
Wow.
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm not going to make a commitment here.
Okay, but will you
but
cast those three actors?
definitely.
You won't make that commitment.
But I wouldn't make the commitment here.
Okay.
But I mean, it's Supervision is not the first time I have worked within the migrant worker community.
Okay.
When I was studying before, I also did a forum theater piece
Right.
with Heng Luan, who's from Drama Box. That was about construction workers. That was about 7-8 years ago. And the interesting thing is then there were a lot of, I think, reports and videos and investigative journalism going into the living conditions of these construction workers then, and it's way worse than it is right now.
Right.
And to see that the state it is now is such a, this whole explosion within such close quarters of the virus. You wouldn't be able to imagine what it was like before. I've seen footage where they're just housed at construction sites and there's no proper sanitation and things like that. But I mean, to go back to the question, I wouldn't commit to it, I think now. But it's definitely something that I have been and am quite interested in.
Right. If I can just ask a question to Jaya, do you see a role that artists and theater makers can play in terms of raising awareness of migrant issues in Singapore?
I think there is a big role, and I think this is something we need to do more of, which is to support migrant workers themselves in expressing their stories.
Right.
There was recently this short film called Salary Day, which was done by a migrant worker.
Yeah, I watched that.
Because I think now there's a lot of conversations and a lot of people saying that we need migrant workers to speak for themselves, and there's a lot of questions, of course, as to how we can go about doing this. Why are there so many people who are speaking for them, and why is there? Of course, begs the question: why is there a need to have to speak for them? Why can't they speak for themselves? So I think a lot of support is needed for them to express themselves, and some of them may want to do it through creative means. Be it dance, be it theater, be it through. I mean, we have the migrant worker poetry competition, which is great. Of course, I think at the end of last year, when there was the literary event, there was questions as to why they are not included into the more mainstream writing events and all of that. So I think the means for them to sort of come out and tell their own stories, because it adds an entirely different dimension to things when it comes from personal stories. Because it's a lived experience rather than even NGOs like us, we would tend to package it in terms of issues and all, and present it as such. But there is a lot of value in allowing migrant workers to
tell their own stories.
Tell their own stories.
I was wondering though whether one potential hurdle to that could be language, that maybe we lack, in terms of the capacity, a pool of translators who are able to work, because one thing also, like looking at forum pages in the press, right? So that question of like, why aren't they writing to the press? Why aren't they expressing themselves? And I think part of it has to do maybe with language, or also fear of repercussions, maybe, or speaking up
Yeah,
as well,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's all very real fears, because like how we saw in the play, and again for migrant workers, a lot of them don't really speak up because they are worried about losing their jobs. And of course, employment security and financial security is something that's very important for them. And that's of course a kind of discussion that will take us into another realm.
Yeah.
But I was listening to a forum today, and one point that was made was just that what you said about translations. You know, when
Right.
the COVID issue hit the dorms, and when it sort of exploded, the
Mm.
first thing that was mobilized was an army of translators.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
Right.
we have right now we have all these calls out. We have entire teams now ready on the go. We
Yeah.
have these websites where medical terms are being translated. I
Right.
know a team of 25 people who are ready to translate anything in Tamil. If you ask them to, they're great
Mhm.
people. They've been helping home a lot.
Right.
You know, so we know that the resources are there, and there are people actually able to utilize their translation skills. And whether translation is the key for us to have better communication
Yeah.
between us and migrant workers is not a question that I answer at this point. I think that requires a bit more research.
Right.
But my point is, if there is a will, there is a way.
Sure.
So if there
Yes.
is, if we can, you know, if there is a space for migrant workers to actually express themselves
Yeah.
through the creative arts, and there are people supporting that in whatever means that they need, then I
Right.
think that's something we can do. You know. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jaya. Thank you. Thomas, back to you. I've got a couple of questions which are related. Yeah. So I'm gonna pull one of them out right now. So you hold on. Let's read this one first. Tom, it's very first name basis with you. Tom, which part of the play really touched you and also took the longest time to write? Okay. So hold that thought, because
Okay.
there's a related question here, which is for Thomas also. How long did it take you to write Supervision, and what were some of the challenges you faced while writing? Yeah. So all this over to you, Thomas.
Um, well, I guess I think one of the hardest things I was stuck about 3/4 into the play for a very long time.
Yep.
That was when kind of everything came to, well, I was really stuck at the point where Tick found out about the cameras, and I really didn't know how to move forward from there.
Right.
Because, you know, that was just, it was difficult, because as a playwright, I wanted to go in a certain way. But I
Mm-hmm.
think when I, you know, sort of imagine him and who he is and what he would do,
Yeah.
he wanted to take it in a different way. And I had this same sort of point with every single character at different points of the play, where I
Right.
wanted it to go one way and then they tugged it in another way. And, you know, I had to find a way to kind of, to just take a leap of faith and just go with them and see what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay. I think maybe I'm gonna start calling the actors back, because I got a couple of questions for the actors. So let's have a party in here.
Hey,
I think I can squeeze six. Can I squeeze six? Yes, I can. Okay. Hi, everyone.
Yay!
I think we're all in.
hi Thomas.
Yay.
Hi
Okay.
Jaya.
Hi, everyone. Okay. So, one question here for the actors particularly. Okay, hang on. Okay, from Jasmine So. Let's see this. Wow. Okay. So Jasmine's asking, to Thomas, Patrick, Umi, and Janice, or Thomas also included, has being a part of Supervision changed or not your opinion of how you want to be cared for in your twilight years?
Well, I definitely don't want to be cared for in my twilight years,
Okay.
by Jenny.
I buy you the char kway teow.
Okay.
Once in a while, it's okay. What?
And by the way, for those of you who have seen the play and see
Yep.
me eating the char kway teow, I must tell you something. Jenny was a real stingy poker, no? She buys for her father the food he loves, but she buys the cheapest version of char kway teow with absolutely nothing inside but soya sauce.
Is that Jenny? Is that Jenny or the props person though? I mean,
The props person.
yeah, let's not confuse them. Okay, but back to the question. I mean, has it changed the way you think you want to be cared for when you're older?
Has it changed the way I want to be cared for?
Yeah.
It's a very hard question to answer, Alfian, because
Sure.
even though I'm 73, I have as yet not thought about the day when I cannot do things for myself.
Yeah.
So that question hasn't really arisen yet.
Sure. What about Janice, Umi?
Umi?
Man, I have not thought about that, but I mean, as of now, I live with my parents. I take care of them.
Yeah.
And like I've been thinking about caregiving a lot and what's important. Like, I mean, it's one to make sure my parents get their medicine or make sure they go to the doctors. But I think the other big part that is missing sometimes from me is being their friend or being having conversation with them, spending quality time with them. So I think when I grow older, I'm not sure, like, would I want someone to be there with me as a friend, or do I just want a helper? Yeah. So
Right.
yeah.
Because those are very different things, right? One is basically someone who's managing your life and your schedule, whereas another one has this relationship with you, right?
Yes, yeah. Very important to have that as well, because it helps with your mental state as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So I maybe just yes, Janice, yes, please.
No, I was just going to say that if I had to be dependent on a full-time caregiver, and if it had to be someone that is not from the family.
Yeah.
So if it was someone like a foreign domestic worker,
Mm.
then in a way, I mean, I personally have had a domestic worker living in my home for over 15 years now, the very same one who brought my children up. And for me, it has always been, it's never been that they are just helping me look after children. It is such an intimate act of care to look after babies and help bring up children that I've always seen it as sort of like as much as you can, sort of like included them as part of the household.
Right.
And it is a very gray line as to when it becomes professional or when it becomes family, and it is a line that you continually negotiate on a day-to-day basis, where those liberties, freedoms, where it's sort of like it's very it is gray. And if it happened to me, and if I then needed to depend on someone to care for me, I think it would have to be the same, where they are looking after your most intimate needs. They cannot just be, they are not just a nurse in the hospital. So their caring, their mental wellness is also important.
Right.
So
Janice, you mentioned this just now, and I thought it was a really interesting point where you mentioned when career women talk about their success, some career women,
so
they hardly give credit, for example, to their domestic workers.
Correct. I mean, I feel like the home help that we get from foreign domestic workers at home, as well as the migrant labor population in general in Singapore, tends to be erased because we don't really account for their contributions to the economy. So At a very basic level, I had a conversation once with Bu Jun Feng, who was going to be the artistic director of one of the National Day parades one year, and I said, Jun Feng, if I had one wish for the National Day parade, would be to see a foreign labor workforce marching alongside all the other people who get to march at the National Day parade, because you can't recognize the work of Samsui women as part of our pioneering generation's contributions without recognizing the Samsui women of our time, which is our foreign labor workforce today, which has contributed to Singapore's economic success. And in the same way, when we talk about our success as whether it's career women or whatever, our economic success as individuals, and if you have relied on a domestic worker at home to look after your kids in order to allow you to climb a corporate ladder, you cannot talk about that success without talking about their work that has given you the chance to do all those things. If you don't talk about it, you're erasing their contribution.
Right. So, Janice, you said something so interesting about Samsi women, because we see them as like the pioneering builders of Singapore, but there's also another category of pioneering builders in Singapore that we also forget, which is penal labor or convict labor, right? The ones who come to Singapore and they're convicts basically, but then they're forced to work. So I almost feel as if the way we are treating some migrant workers today, and in the way we're sort of like neglecting to give them credit, whatever, is an extension of that amnesia over how much convict labor built Singapore, especially the civic district, for example, right?
Yes.
City Hall, etc. All those were built using convict labor, mostly from South Asia. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think the three of us in the cast have a question that we'd like to ask Thomas.
Thomas, yeah. That's great, yes.
Janice, ask him the question.
Yeah.
It's blindside.
Yeah, who's asking Thomas the question? Are you, Patrick?
Janice is going to ask him.
Janice.
Am I?
Okay. All right.
No lies, just a joke. We were backstage going, hey, how come Thomas doesn't want to cast us in the sequel?
Jang.
No, but I think there are a couple of questions. I don't know if you want to address this about the ending of the play. A number of people have asked about.
Yeah, exactly. So I was wondering whether I want to reserve it for last. There's so many, Thomas. There's at least like 5 or 6 questions. I don't think I will pull out one specifically, but I don't know whether you've seen them, which is asking about the ambiguity of the ending. Yeah. So, would you want to address that? Because I think some of the questions were like, what actually happened? Did he or did he not?
I think, Umi, I think you might remember that during both our runs in Singapore, we when we spoke to members of the audience, there were so many suggestions, right? Some people said, yeah, we know he committed suicide. And some people, because of the lighter flashing at the last moment of the play, they said he burned the house down because he hates being alive.
That's actually what my father thought. My father watched the whole play. He didn't talk to me. The next morning, he woke up and he's like, I know. After his maid left him, his daughter left him, he burned the flat. And I'm like, should I take all the lighters away from my father?
It's like HDB Gothic enough.
Yeah, that's what my father said.
Thomas, any?
We actually we should actually ask the people who are tuning in now.
Yeah.
For what they think.
Correct. I mean, I always feel like this is one of those questions just like soccer lah. You kick to me, actually I kick to you back. I'm more interested in your response as an audience. But that said, I wonder whether like Jaya is an audience member.
So Jaya,
she's not someone who was involved in the making of the play or whatever. She's audience. So any thoughts on that ending, Jaya?
What I liked about the play is that it had many overlapping issues. It had the issue of growing old.
Right.
It had the issue of the stress of caregiving. and the overlap of domestic workers and elder care, which is a very, very common sort of theme that's happening in Singapore now.
Right.
But I guess it's sort of I won't really I don't really have a strong opinion about the ending. I think it was open ended, but it was very emotional. It was a very emotional ending, especially when Yanti had to leave her care recipient, and she had to, because she was terminated and all of that. But this what I will say is that this situation of a elderly person living with just a domestic worker is very common now. It's and you see that sort of when the domestic worker leaves, where's that elderly person now? What because there was the play also didn't sort of answer the question of whether Yanti was going to be replaced, when is she going to be replaced, what is the relationship between Jenny and the father, and how is it, assuming that of course the character doesn't commit suicide, but it depicts something quite, the dependence, I guess, of elderly people now on domestic workers. And so that's one thought I have about the ending. I didn't really give too much analysis on.
Sure. No. I think the whole point that is open, that is ambiguous. I mean, we have this Mel who says, "I wanted a happy ending," and I feel like telling her, "You can have it," right? Because it is ambiguous, it is open, and I like the fact that by throwing that question back to the audience, we have interesting comments like this, and I sometimes feel like audiences don't give themselves enough credit as to how to interpret the play, right? So Jasmine says, "I don't think Tek ended his life per se, but that doesn't mean he didn't die." It's high, profound.
I think when audiences come and watch a play, you kind of complete the process. And obviously we don't want to give everything to you, partially also because part of when I'm in the theater and when I'm watching something, my imagination's engaged, I'm emotionally invested, all these things kind of happen. That's the experience of watching theater. So we always try not to kind of sort of reduce your experience of it to one singular interpretation.
Right. And that's the respect that you have for the audience, right? And this means much more than just spoon feeding the audience. If I could take on just one short question, which asked whether domestic workers came to watch the play, right? So there's a question by Kevin Bathman here. Just a short one, it's a factual question. Did Warais host a special night where they invited migrant workers to attend the play? I'm curious what they thought of this play and they felt Thomas did justice to this story. So I think the short answer to that was that we had many special nights because every night there would be around 15 tickets that were specially reserved for foreign domestic workers to come and watch the show. We are gonna wrap up soon. So maybe a couple of questions. Thomas, maybe you wanna answer that question, but I'm curious what they thought of this play and if they felt Thomas did justice to this story. And if I can ask the actors, what was the most memorable response from any audience member who came up to you after the play? Okay, what do you remember most about a response?
I think for me, like when they on the nights when the foreign domestic workers came, we I would usually hang out outside the theater after that, and some of them would come and talk to me, and some of them might I remember them telling me like, oh, actually Yanti should do this, and then after that she should go and do that, and to me that was them kind of taking ownership of of this story as well. So I mean I was glad that they were so invested to kind of think of what else Yanti could have done in that situation as they were thinking about it in their own experience as well.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Actors, any very memorable responses you got after the play?
Well, one memorable response I had was one night during the last run, a friend of mine, an English writer and actor himself.
Yep.
He came to watch the play. I mean, he's an old friend of mine, but he is very well known for being very cynical and very critical, especially about theatre.
Right.
So when he came and watched it, when I went out to the lobby and met him, as usual, he didn't say very much except that, yeah, okay, well done. That was it. So I thought, we're in for it. But less than a week later, he wrote a very long and glowing review of the play, of Thomas's writing, of our acting, the production. And it was totally out of character for him because I've never ever seen him write an article like that.
Right.
That was one of the high points of the audience reaction. Yeah.
Yeah, but he kept you in suspense for 1 week.
Yeah.
Umi or Janice? Yeah.
Well, actually, I was just looking at the live comments and I realized someone had asked whether or not I had CCTVs in my own house. I don't even have the technological know-how to how to set it up.
Yes.
And this was so many years ago when I had someone work with me in the home. So there wasn't even the ability to put up cameras. That it didn't even exist, the technology.
Right.
And I am from the school of thought where if you are really going to employ someone to live with you in the home, it's a contract that you have decided, you have given up some rights as an employer and as someone who has invited someone into your home.
Right.
That my philosophy is that you've given up your right to privacy, even as the person who owns the house.
Right.
You've given up your right to control every single thing in your home.
Yeah.
If you want someone to take care of your children, of your parent, and you're going to leave the house, you can't. You have to trust. And we have not really talked about that very much tonight, which is about the contract, the compact that as a society we have with people who are working in our home that we call truly home, Singapore.
Right.
Which is there's a level of trust and give and take. And if we think that we invite someone to come in and work for us and that we can control them, it's just the wrong starting point altogether, I always felt, secretly, I always feel like I think it's only fair that people who have worked in Singapore for a certain number of years should be able to, at the very least, ballot for citizenship.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's critical to because they deserve having lived here and contributed so much, the right to continue to live here as citizens.
Right. They've invested so much. Yeah,
correct. And that they should have the freedom to move their families here, who have also sacrificed so much for our sake. So I mean that's where I stand, and it has a lot to do with the compact that we have with people who we invite into our home.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Janice. Umi, any last words, concluding words?
Very quickly, when I watched the show as an audience, right, online, it was the first time that I could watch. So my reaction was when Jenny started the monologue, I was like, oh my God, am I that daughter? Am I? Like,
right, okay.
I'm going through those things, but when I was acting, I did not like see that or reflect that. But when I saw Jenny in her monologue, I was like, I go through that also.
Right, that's so interesting. You saw, Jenny reflecting something of your own life. Okay, I think thank you so much for joining us here today. Yeah. If you have liked, so this to the viewers, if you enjoyed watching the play, we run only until tomorrow. Tomorrow is our last day. We are going to go offline at 3 p.m. tomorrow, and we're going to rotate to another play, which is Monkey Goes West, which is going to be on tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. I would like to thank the actors as well as Thomas Lim, the playwright, as well as Jaya Anil Kumar from Home for joining us today. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing such wonderful insights today. I would also like to add that we have all these questions, and if the actors are free, you are very welcome to answer them, to write, in your own time. Okay. I like to tell, Ivan was very hardworking with his Emily Q&A. So he
Is
spoil
that
market for
pressure?
all of
Is
you.
that pressure?
Yes, he spoil market for all of you already. So you have to answer all these questions which are specifically directed to you. Okay. Yeah. Do I hear Ivan? Okay. So thank you so much, everyone. And have a great end of circuit breaker and hopefully freedom in a couple of weeks' time. Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks,
Stay
Thank
home.
everybody.
you. Thank you,
Stay
Thank you,
safe.
everyone.
Stay healthy.
Bye.
everyone.
Everyone stay home. Okay. Thank you. Bye bye.